Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name is Amanda and I'm so glad that you could join me today. Today I need to do a further video because it seems like my video about the hierarchy in Protestant denominations led to more questions than it answered. So I apologize for not being clear enough. Today we're going to go a little bit more in depth, particularly on the ordination process. So the priests, the ministers, how do they get to that level? That's what we're going to dive in more today. In Catholicism, there was very specific steps that you had to take in order to reach the next level. The tricky part in the Protestant denominations, it's not as clear. There's actually more of the power for people who do not have a theology degree or a position of authority. And so it gets tricky. And as you'll notice in our video, even when you come into that position of authority, you can get there in a variety of different ways. And once you get that position of authority, you may not choose to stay in that position of authority. It's a lot more wiggly than Catholicism's hierarchy. And I did my best to present it, but I think I can improve some understandings. So that's what our goal is today. We're going to look at Protestant ordinations, and particularly the different leaders, what's required, what's expected, how do you get there, and then we're going to look at the ordination process itself. Okay, so in the Protestant denominations, when you get to be in one of those leadership roles, it was one of those petals around the flower, okay? So the congregation or the people have all the power, and they elect people for all these different positions. If you want to step into a more leadership role, then you would be one of the three leaders, okay? So there's three different types of leaders within the church in the Protestant denominations. For frame of reference, I'm going to be speaking specifically about the UCC, or United Church of Christ. Every Protestant denomination handles their leadership in slightly different fashions. And being that I grew up in the United Church of Christ, I don't feel right about speaking about other churches' hierarchies when I don't fully understand them. That's just being bluntly honest, okay? So in the United Church of Christ, if you want a leadership role, okay, in the church, then you would be one of three leaders, okay? So I'm going to start from the one with the least requirements, and I'm going to move to the one with the most requirements. Okay, so the first type of leader is called a commissioned leader. This is a position that is paid. All the positions are paid, but this position, you don't need to have any special schooling. You don't need to have any special background. You are not able to do any sacraments. So you can't offer communion. You can't offer to preside over a wedding or a baptism, things like that. You can't do that. In the commissioned role, this would be if you have music directors or Christian education directors, or maybe you're a youth pastor, or maybe you're even a nurse for the church. All of those different roles would be commissioned leaders, okay? So you have expertise or knowledge in a certain area, and you're willing to use that knowledge for the church, okay? That makes a commissioned officer. The only requirement besides having that knowledge is you have to be a member of the UCC church. Now, you could be a parish nurse for a different church, but that's not likely. It's not likely. Typically, If you are a member, if you are the youth director, you're typically a member of that church, because as you're commissioned to work for the church, you're very involved. So typically you're a member of that church. Okay. This is special because the skills are to you, they're specific to you. So if you choose to change churches, or if you choose to change denominations, maybe you don't want to be part of the UCC anymore. Maybe you want to go and be part of the Methodist organization, or maybe you're going to be part of the Lutheran organization. That skill set is transferable with you, which makes sense. If you are a nurse, your nursing degree is going to go with you. If you choose to be a parish nurse for a different church, that's your choice, because it's your knowledge and your experience. Okay? The next layer, so it's not in a hierarchy, but I'm going to go from least to most schooling. Okay? So first we had commissioned. The next one, first we had commissioned. The next one is licensed or licensed lay pastor or minister. Basically, in the Protestant denominations, they will use the term pastor, minister, leader, reverend. All of those terms are interchangeable. It really comes down to that particular leader and which one they like best, which one they resonate with. In my time with the United Church of Christ, I had leaders who were reverends, I had leaders who were pastors, I had leaders who were just leaders, and I had one leader who wanted to be called Reverend Doctor. That's what they wanted. And so as a licensed leader, second one, licensed leader or licensed lay leader, they have a much longer process. They do need to go to a school, okay? But they don't have to have a bachelor's or a master's degree in theology, okay? What their role is in the church is they are kind of like the minister, pastor's second hand. Whenever they are not available, the licensed lay leader can step in and do anything that the pastor can. The licensed lay leader can perform marriages, can perform baptisms, can preside over funerals, can do communion, they can preach, they can do anything, as long as they are either directed by the minister or the minister is not available. So frequently the licensed lay leader would step in if the minister was going on vacation, or if the minister was busy with a different meeting, the licensed lay leader would step in and kind of fill that gap or fill that void, okay? Now, to become a licensed lay leader is a process. Most definitely is a process. It starts by, if you are just a normal member of the congregation and you feel, Christians tend to call it a call, or like an inner yearning or aching, like I want to do something more. They say if you feel that call, the first step is that you should go speak to your pastor and have a conversation with them. They will typically talk to you about, what are you feeling? Why are you feeling? What have you tried? What are you thinking? To kind of help you decipher out, okay, is this something that you just want to change in yourself? Or is this something that perhaps you are being called to be a licensed lay leader and you need more support and you need more time and more learning to be more of service? Okay, so the first thing you do is you talk to the pastor. The second thing you have to do is you have to apply for what's called a licensed lay leader academy. In the UCC, they just changed the name of that to the Damascus Project once you get that far. But basically in that application, you have to say what you're interested in. Are you interested in helping more of the youth? Are you interested in connecting with the elderly? Are you interested in raising awareness of racial injustice? What are you interested in? Okay, so what you're interested is, you have to describe your journey or your pilgrimage thus far. What have you been doing in the church? Why do you think this call is happening? And then what do you plan to do about it? Okay. You then have to have a formal letter. You have to, and they take that very seriously about having a formal letter explaining who you are, why you're here, what you believe, and why you believe this is the time for you to make that step. Okay. After that, they also have to verify that you are a member of a United Church of Christ. If you are not a member of the United Church of Christ, you can't go to Licensed Lay Academy. You have to be a member of the church before you do that, okay? You then have to include letters of reference. You need at least 3, they prefer 4, and one of them has to be a letter from your pastor, because the licensed lay leader, again, is that stopgap, that filler between the minister and services that need to be provided and they're not available. So you need to have your pastor's support in order to go on this process. If your pastor's not supportive of it, you can go through the schooling, but you will have a tough time finishing without their support. Okay. And the last thing is you will need a transcript of your education. Not that you're going to graduate from this program with a degree, but they want to understand you as a learner and they want to know that you have certain skills. If your transcript shows that, for example, your communication skills are awful, you're going to need extra help on that. They're going to want to work with you more on that because in the leadership role, you're going to have to communicate with people and they want to support you in that. So once you finally apply, that's just the application process. Once you finally apply, you have to come and you have to do an interview in front of a board. It typically ranges between 3 and 8 people. And they're asking you questions. They want to know more about you and your process and why are you doing this and what makes you feel like now is the right time. After you are interviewed by the board, you would be welcomed to what's called an exploration retreat. Basically, it's a meeting space away from your family, friends, all that stuff. And it's typically a whole weekend, if not a long weekend. And you are meeting with people who are in a similar place with you. So they're all trying to figure out, am I supposed to do something more? Am I not? And they're just starting that experience. Okay, that can be very powerful for some people. That can be very overwhelming for some people. Sometimes they will go to those exploration retreats and come out and say, you know what? I think I can use my gifts in a different way. I can use more of my gifts in that commissioned role than I could in the licensed lay leader role. Maybe they have no interest in providing communion or weddings or funerals or things like that. And that's completely fine. That's their choice. After they have the exploration retreat, it doesn't get easier. The next part is you need to have a psychological evaluation because they want to make sure that A, you're not crazy, and B, that you can withstand the rigor of being the one that people rely on in tough times. Because that is not something easy for people to do. Sometimes people will crack under that, and their goal is to support everyone, regardless if you are a leadership role or not a leadership role, and they don't want bad things for you. So they're going to have you do a full psychological evaluation. Then you'll have to go through a background check, and it's quite an extensive background check because you're going to be working with people in very intimate and sensitive moments. So they want to make sure that you are a person of character that they can rely on to be safe around people. Okay? Then after all that, you're going to meet with what's called a discernment committee. And this is going to be similar to the first group that you met with. Again, typically 3, this one's a little bit smaller. It's typically 2 to 5 people, and they're going to ask you more challenging questions. They're going to ask you more detailed questions. They're going to vet you a little bit more. They want to get to the root of where you are. They want to know more about that exploration retreat. Are you making connections? Is this something you're actively pursuing, or is this just something you're kind of trying to float through? Okay. After that, you will be appointed an advisor. So an advisor is typically somebody in your association, so they're close to your church, and you will meet with them on a regular basis, and they'll kind of help you through the process. They may have been through the Licensed Lay Academy. They may have been just a minister and went through and got a theology degree, and that's how they started. It's just different, but you're going to need some support. Somebody who's actually been there, actually done it. That's when you're going to get your advisor. Way down after the discernment committee. The next thing is you are going to be officially enrolled in a program. So in the United Church of Christ, it's called the Licensed Lay Leader Program or the Damascus Project. Okay, and as part of that, you're going to be taking classes. You're going to have books to read. You're going to have virtual classes to attend. You're even going to have in-person classes for weekends at a time. And each class tends to be 3 to 6 months long. Okay, a lot of time you have to do it by yourself, and then you're going to do papers and you're going to have discussions and things like that. Now, all those different classes, depending on what you need, what your interest area is, that can take between 2 and 4 years. 2 and 4 years. And again, at the end of it, you don't have a license. You don't have anything special besides this ordination, this approval from the denomination that you can provide these services, okay? Once you're in the program, you do the classes. Throughout that time, you're going to have semi-annual retreats. You're going to have meetings with your advisor. Like I said, you're going to have times where you're going to have to go away for a weekend or a long weekend, and you're going to have to meet with other people to talk about your experience. Now, I've known people who went through the Licensed Lay Leader program, and it's doable if you have a flexible job, if you don't have a lot of other commitments in your life. It is something that very truly, if you're going through this, you need to have an inner drive to do it. It's not something you would go through just for fun. That's not what happens. Because at the end, you're not going to have a license. You are purely a stopgap for needs of the church when the minister can't fulfill them. And your involvement is tied to that church. If you choose to leave that church after you've completed your Licensed Lay Leader program, that knowledge goes with you, but you can't just assume another Licensed Lay Leader position at a different church because the church has to sponsor you. Now, you could be a Licensed Lay Leader at this church and move to this church, and you would have to take a step back. You would have to go through the mentorship program again. Make sure that pastor is supportive of you being a Licensed Lay Leader. Maybe take another class or two. It's a shorter process, but you have to be vetted by that church again in order to be able to do sacraments for that church. Because again, if you remember in the United Church of Christ, every church has their own decision-making power. So what this church chooses to do and what this church chooses to do may not be the same. So you go through all this work and you change churches and it doesn't transfer with you. You need to do more work. So that can kind of turn people off from the Licensed Lay Leader role. They typically only do that if they are invested in this one church and they're not planning on leaving. Because it is a lot. It is a lot. Okay? So we've talked about the commissioned role. We've talked about the Licensed Lay Leader or license role. The next one is the ordained. This is the one that requires the most schooling, the most time. It is typically viewed as the main pastor. Okay? So in order to be a licensed, ordained pastor, first and foremost, you have to have either a bachelor's or a master's degree in theology. You can go to any school you want, get a theology degree. Once you have that, then you would apply for something called seminary. Seminary, it's similar to the Catholic seminary where they're learning about the church and things like that. But in the Catholic seminary, they're learning about the Catholic Church, the Catholic structure. In the United Church of Christ seminary, they're learning about the UCC, or the United Church of Christ, their structure, their hierarchy, their policies, things like that. So you have the knowledge base, you know, you grew up in the church, or you're part of the church now. And the tricky part for me personally with my beliefs is, in order to be part of the ordained process and be accepted into seminary, you have to acknowledge Jesus Christ as the head of the church. Not God, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the head, because without him, everything else doesn't matter, because Jesus Christ is the one that saved us. That's what the United Church of Christ believes, okay? So you go through it, you go ahead and you apply for seminary. And the seminary has to be denomination specific. So if you're Lutheran, you're going to a Lutheran seminary. If you're Baptist, you're going to a Baptist seminary. United Church of Christ has their own. They have some in St. Louis. They have some in New York. They have some in Chicago. There are, when I counted, I want to say 8 or 10 different seminaries throughout the United States. And you have to go there for classes. Now, sometimes you are taking classes virtually, and sometimes you take classes in person. The classes can be 2 years or it can be 6 years, depending on what you particularly want to specialize in. So through the seminary process, you're going to end that process with a degree, with an advanced degree. You could have a Master's of Divinity degree. That would be 3 years. You could have a Master of Arts degree in theology. That would be 2 years. You could have a Master's in Sacred Theology. That would be 4 years. You could have a doctorate in ministry. That would be, need 2 hands, 6 years. You could have a doctorate in ministry in preaching. So specializing in preaching, again, 6 years. Or you could have a doctorate in philosophy. And again, that would be 6 years. So all of those different doctorates you can earn through the seminary. Okay. Now, while you are in seminary, you're going to be taking a wide variety of classes. You're going to take classes on preaching, worship, scripture, faith formation, basically like Sunday school and confirmation, stuff like that. Pastoral counseling, administration, UCC polity, or how the UCC came to be in the connection portion, and as well as doing field studies. So you're going to go and have little times at different churches. You're going to have some experience. You're going to be shadowing the main pastor and working with people in small groups. That happens differing amounts of time and in differing locations depending on how well you do. Okay? Once you complete all of seminary, then you have your degree. Once you have your degree, it's on you. Okay? So seminary will still support you. They'll tell you about job leads, things like that. And there's a special website for minister jobs. And you basically apply to a church. And if the church interviews you, they like you, they'll have you come and do a test sermon. Because remember, in the United Church of Christ, the people have the power. So you'll come and do a test sermon. The people will listen to you. And then at the end of your service, or at the end of your, not at the end of your sermon, they'll wait until the end of the service. But the people will actually vote on, do they want to call you as their pastor? Do they want to offer you the job or not? That can be a little intimidating. You are literally asked to step out of the sanctuary while they vote and count the votes. And you're just waiting over there. Can you imagine coming back if they said thanks but no thanks? That's a bit humbling. A bit humbling. So if you are called to a church, if you're offered a church to serve, then you would participate and schedule what's called an ordination process. So it's kind of 2 parts. There's ordination and installation. So ordination is when you are called to your first church after completing seminary. It basically happens during a normal worship service, but they're going to focus more on blessings for you as the pastor. For that one, you're going to wear an all white robe to signify your newness to the faith. And then you're going to have a stole, so a fabric piece that kind of goes around your neck. And it's typically special to you. And they're basically doing blessings for you, blessings for your church, giving you strength, things like that. And then frequently what will happen is there'll also be an installation portion. That's where you are tied or committing yourself to this church, okay? So as a pastor in the United Church of Christ, you're supposed to be at the service of this church. So it doesn't matter if somebody is in the hospital on Christmas Day, you're still expected to go and check on that person at the bare minimum. So your life is no longer yours if you are the pastor. And that can be tough if you have a family. That can be very tough. It can be extremely difficult if you are a single individual and you're trying to start a relationship. Because not many people want to date a pastor. It's just a funny barrier that a lot of people have. So your life is no longer yours when you become a pastor. And that's a big deal. So there'll be an installation service. And at that installation service, again, it's part of the normal worship service. But there will be certain parts that one of the people from the church says or offers different blessings for this pastor. And they basically acknowledge, like, yes, we're calling you, we want you, things like that. And there will also be a representation of an association pastor. So one of the churches in your area, maybe your region, depending on how involved or how lengthy this process is, they will come and represent the wider church. So you're going to have representations of that church in particular, and then you're going to have representations of the wider church, that they are supporting you. They're supporting this relationship between you and the church and helping you work together. Okay? Once you have that, then you are in service to that church. You can resign from that position anytime you want, but typically there's a whole process that you have to go through with the association if you want to dissolve this connection. And it's basically a vetting process to see, like, you're not just flippantly leaving, that there is a deeper root of the issue and they want to try to solve or address that issue if they can. If that can't be resolved, then certainly you're released from that. And then there's a whole different service where they essentially release you from that commitment and they wish you well in your next endeavors. If you are an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ and you choose to leave this church, your certification, your ordainment goes with you. You can automatically go and apply to any United Church in the United States. There are some in Canada. There are some in Europe. You can go anywhere in the United Church of Christ. If you want to change denominations, you can do that as well, but you might need additional schooling, okay? So, and that goes both ways. The United Church of Christ is one that looks more at the similarities of faith than the differences. So, in the United Church of Christ, they will typically allow any Protestant minister to participate in the ordination process so that they can preach at the United Church of Christ, okay? They don't typically do Catholicism because they have a different hierarchy and their learning and their knowledge is different. It'd be a much bigger step. They certainly, if a priest from the Catholic Church decided, I'm no longer Catholic and I'm really called to be part of the United Church of Christ, they certainly could. They would have to go through a shortened seminary process because the policies are different, the practices are different, and it's more different than they are similar. With the Protestants, it's more similar than they are different. So their process is shorter. Okay, so most Protestants, can typically transfer with a course or two from like the history, because you need to know the history of the UCC, what they stand for, the policies, the polity, things like that. And the big thing is they have to be a member of the United Church of Christ. You can't come and be a Lutheran, currently a Lutheran, wanting to get ordained in the United Church of Christ, but still attend a Lutheran church. No, in order to do that, you need to be able to live it. So you have to be a member of the United Church of Christ and then go through that process. That's just a rule that they have. There are 3 churches, however, where you don't have to go through a process of taking more classes. There are 3 denominations where the United Church of Christ have deemed that they are so similar that they actually hold dual standings. So they can be a preacher at the United Church of Christ or this other denomination, and it doesn't matter. Okay? And there's actually people that I know of that they are the pastor for both a United Church of Christ and one of these other ones. And that would be the Disciples of Christ, the Presbyterian Church, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church. So those 3 churches are the ones that are most similar to the United Church of Christ. So a pastor can jump back and forth to either. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense as to what I was talking about with the church hierarchy in Protestantism. Remember, I'm just specifically talking today about the United Church of Christ. There are 3 levels of leaders, if you want to call it that, but the power is still in the people. And the leaders have to answer to the people. If the leaders are messing up, the people can oust them. Okay? And in some of the leadership roles, they can take their learning, their standards, their knowledge with them, and in some they can't. It's just interesting. The most interesting part for me was learning about the different denominations and how they could change and interweave. That's just intriguing to me. So I hope this cleared up some of your misconceptions and confusions from my earlier video. And if I mess something up again, please let me know and I'll do another video trying to explain myself further. I hope you have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.